Hi, welcome back to Become a CSS Superhero with Stylus. In this lesson, you'll be learning to use Stylus variables and functions to incorporate something known as the golden ratio and the number phi into your layouts. Now, the number phi is a Greek number that represents a value of 1.618. Now, the golden ratio is a relationship between two different values. If A equals 1, this rectangle would be 1.618 wide. The golden ratio can repeat infinitely. If this square here were 1 by 1, then the whole width of this rectangle would be 1.618. Again, if this square were 1 by 1, then this length would be 1.618. If this square were 1 by 1, then this length would be 1.618, and so on and so on. Another way to express that ratio is that if the value of A were 61.8%, then the value of B would be 38.2%. Now, why does this matter? It just sounds like a bunch of numbers at first. Now, the reason is that ancient Greek philosophers discovered that these values would keep popping up in nature and in anything that we intuitively perceived as being beautiful. As an example, the Mona Lisa has been shown to use the golden ratio, to use the number phi. And we see it in the famous Nautilus shell, in plants, and it has also been shown to appear in the human face. Now, if you use these same principles of beauty that have shown up in art all throughout history, in architecture, and in nature itself, in your designs, you'll find that it becomes a lot easier to create a layout that just looks right. Now, you will remember this layout from our earlier tutorials. This layout actually already has these golden ratios in place. And what we're going to do is strip this whole layout back and rebuild it so you can see how phi and the golden ratio are incorporated along the way. Okay, so the first part of the process is to establish our variables to work with. And one of the primary ones that you'll be using is phi. So that's just a matter of creating a variable named phi and setting it to 1.618. And we're also going to use the percentage values that I spoke about, the 61.8% and 38.2%. Now, we're not always going to want to use those values with an actual percentage unit applied to them. So instead of saving the variable out with the percentage unit attached, we'll turn it into just a plain number, which means we'll then be able to use it in several different ways. So to describe the larger size of the golden ratio, we will use a variable called golden major. So that's for the major part of the golden ratio, and we will set that to a value of 0.618, which is basically the same thing as 61.8%. For the smaller size, we will describe that as golden minor, and we'll set that to 0.382. And again, that is basically equivalent to 38.2%. And now we're ready to start using these numbers in our design. Here is our original design, but I have just hidden all the elements until we come along to setting up the layout for each one. And we'll begin by adding we'll turn off this display none setting, and we'll add some padding into our header. And we're going to use Stylus's unit function, and we're going to set the header to just have a padding value of phi rems. And there you go, straight away, that's in place. You can see that it's got quite nice padding all around it by default. However, the logo is probably pushed in a little bit too far from the edges. We probably don't need it to come quite so far in. The top and bottom padding is just nice, but we're going to reduce the left and right padding a little bit. So to do that, we're going to use our golden major number. So again, using the unit function, we use golden major rems. And there you go. That's still a golden ratio number, but it looks just a little bit more how you would expect the layout to appear in the header. All right, now let's have a look at the menu. Actually, we'll just comment this out first so you can see how the menu looks without any styling. Now first, we will add in some margin and line height. And some margin to the left of each of these menu items. And in this case, we only want a small gap in between the items. So we're going to use the smallest of our numbers, which is golden minor. And as we talked about earlier, because we want all of the design of this menu to be relative to the font size of the actual menu itself, we're going to use M's rather than rems. Okay, that's pretty good. Now we're just going to add some padding inside the actual menu item. So that padding will be applied to the link, which is inside these list items. And in this case, we're going to use just straight up 1M. Now 1 is actually a golden ratio number because you remember that we had our rectangle where if A was equal to 1, the whole width of the element would be equal to 1.618. So you don't always have to use these variables. Just the number 1 is also a golden ratio value. So we save that. And there we go, that's starting to shape up. And now we want to get our curved corners back on our buttons. And we'll do that down here with a border radius CSS3 mix-in from nib. And once more, we will use the unit function and our golden major variable. The only thing left is to stop those being so squishy by giving them some line height. Now we'll start by just putting in a line height value of phi. But you can see that's a little bit too small. The default line height is 1 and we've multiplied that out by phi once by using 1.618 but that's still not quite big enough. So we want to be able to take extra steps. We want to be able to multiply that number by phi more than once. And to do that, we're going to use a function, a custom function called step. And we're just going to paste that function in all at once and then show you how it's used. Okay, so here is our step function. And I'm going to put it to use down here so you can see how it's done. And the first parameter is start, and that is the default value that we've begun with. As I mentioned, the default line height is 1. Now we're going to decide how many steps we want to apply this function to. And that means how many times do you want to have your original value multiplied? And we're going to say 2. We already tried one step, which is just using phi as 1.618. That's 1 times 1.618. We want to go one step higher, so we'll change that to 2. The number that we are going to be multiplying by, so this is our multiplier argument, is phi. And then the fourth argument is the unit. In this case, we want a unit of M. Now we'll save that and render it. And there you go, that looks much better. It looks very natural. Now we're ready to start moving through the rest of our code and using our new variables and function. All right, so next up is our hero section. And we're going to just add some padding to the wrapper. And we're just going to make that 1 rem, top and bottom, and 0 left and right. Again, 1 is a golden ratio value. And to the actual hero unit itself, we will set a padding of golden major rem. Now what you can do is you can start out just by using a single unit of golden major, golden minor, or phi. If it's too small or too big, then you can try one of the other variables, and if that's still not right, then you can use your step function. All right, next up, we've got our middle section with its middle items inside. And we will also use the same amount of padding from the hero wrap in the middle section. Much better. Each of these middle items needs some padding on the left. And we're going to use our step function here. So starting with 1m, using 2 steps, multiplying by phi, and using a rem unit. Starting to look better. Also need some padding on the right. And we'll use 1 rem. Now our little icons are still looking a little bit weird, so we'll have to adjust those. We'll set their left position using the step function, a start value of 1, 2 steps, multiplying by phi, and using an m value. So then what we're going to do is multiply our resulting value by negative 0.5. So that gives us half of the amount of padding that's on the left there. All right, next up is our main article section. Now, it's always a good idea to use percentage-based widths for any columns so that they remain flexible for responsiveness. This is why when we created our golden major and golden minor variables, we didn't attach any units to them so that we could later use them as percentages if we want to, as well as having used them for rem and m values. Now, to convert our golden major and golden minor variables to percentages, we're going to include this little percent function. It's just a simple process that will convert any number that you feed the function to a percentage value. And now, if we go ahead and set the width of the smaller column to percent golden minor, and we then set the width of the content column to percent golden major, you immediately get the correct ratios in the width of each of these columns. That still looks a little bit funny because we haven't added any padding. We'll go ahead and do that now. Padding, step, starting point of 1, 2 steps, multiplying by phi using rem values. There we go, starting to look much better. And we also need some padding on the content. Padding left. And we're just going to use the same amount that the overall area is padded by. Looking much better. So now we want to make our read more buttons look right. Now I'll just put the whole lot of code in all at once for you. Save a little time. And there you go. Just like that, it just looks right. And finally, just need to add a little padding to our footer, which we will set to have phi as its padding value. And there we go. So you can see how easy that will make it to create layouts that look right. You won't have to sit there deciding if 25 pixels or 30 pixels is the right amount. You just work with these 3 variables and you'll find typically one of the 3 variables by themselves will be the right amount. And if not, then you just use your step function to adjust it a little bit. In the next and final lesson of the course, you'll learn how to generate H-tag styles with 1 line of code using things called hashes, iteration, and interpolation. I'll see you in the final lesson.